Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Well, good afternoon. Welcome. For those that don't know me, I'm Stephen Pettigo. I am the director of the LBJ Urban Lab and faculty at the LBJ School, just across the Greenway there. It's great to welcome you all to our event, Unlocking Housing Supply, looking at market-driven solutions for growing our communities. I'm excited to see a really full room today, particularly as we address these issues. A couple thoughts. I want to say a big thank you to my colleagues at the Civitas Institute, Ryan and Joel, for helping us put this event together. I actually think this is we were talking about this before the event. This is one of the first collaborations that we've seen between the Civitas Institute and the LBJ School, and hopefully we'll continue to do more of this. So it's really excited to do this with y'all. So thank you all for being here. We are here today to really unpack and talk about the idea and the issue of housing affordability. As we know, you look at across Texas, this is an issue that we are seeing that's coming up to the forefront of our policy discussions. I'm a member of an organization called the Texas Lyceum. Every year we do a poll that asks Texas residents what are the issues that really matter to them and are the pressing issues of the time. And about 75% of our respondents to the survey have indicated that housing affordability and the challenges of housing affordability is front and center for Texas residents. And if you think back 4 or 5 years prior to the pandemic, I moved from New York University, come to LBJ School. The idea of a housing affordability and the challenges of housing affordability was something that a lot of Texans weren't really, frankly, talking a lot about. It was one of those things we still thought about our affordability as a challenge. And as we know now, looking across our state, it's become a bigger issue. And particularly, it's a growing issue across the U.S. It's estimated about 4.5 million, 5 million deficit in terms of the homes that we'll need here. If we look at Texas residents, Texas households, about 1 in 3 Texas households are spending about more than 30% of their income. If you look at renters, particularly renters, we know that renters making under $20,000, 9 in 10 are cost burden. So there's an issue of dealing with our affordability that's really front and center. I think what makes this event exciting for me is, frankly, it's a room that's really comprised of people that I actually don't hang out with a lot in terms of different folks that are thinking about market-based solutions. I find myself a lot of times hanging out in the affordable housing space. And so today I'm excited to talk about mixed perspectives about how we think about these issues. Particularly, we've got a lot of expertise to the table, legal and regulatory expertise. I'm excited that Mayor Parker from Fort Worth is here, as well as my good friend Kirk Watson. Mayor Kirk Watson is here as well to talk about what's happening here in Austin and Fort Worth, 2 of the fastest growing cities, by the way, in the country, and trading populations back and forth all the time, to talk about what they're doing from a policy standpoint and, frankly, how they're working with the private sector to address these issues. So for today, we've got a really kind of fun event set up for you all. We're going to be doing a series of what I call kind of lightning round discussion sessions. We're going to kick off our session today with a really fun keynote from Jennifer Hernandez, who I'll introduce here in a bit, to talk about what are some lessons that we can learn, particularly from another state named California, frankly, and some of the things that have happened there, and maybe some things that we could look to as opportunity, but maybe things that we should avoid. My colleague Ryan Streeter is going to lead a conversation with our mayors, as we mentioned earlier. And then if you are a data nerd like myself, we've got a really awesome conversation that my friend Joel Kotkin is going to moderate with a few folks, looking at what the data tells us and what's the story around affordability issues. And then we'll close up the evening with a discussion that I'll lead around what's happening with our practitioners. What are practitioners in the space actually seeing around these issues? So again, thank you all for being here. Again, thanks to Ryan and Joel and the Civitas Institute for doing this. And thank you all for being part of today's conversation. So with that, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Jennifer Hernandez. Jennifer was telling me she's in from California on her 24-hour visa to visit the state of Texas, which I appreciate. We don't want her to stay too long. We don't want her to do what all the other Californians in my neighborhood have done, and that is actually unpack and move in. But Jennifer has practiced land use and environmental law for more than 30 years. She leads Holland Knight's West Coast Land Use Environmental Group. She's a longtime chair of the firm's national presence around land use and the government team. She splits her time between Berkeley and LA. She's built, I think, a really robust career kind of navigating this complex regulatory environment and understanding what are the things that are the barriers that are standing in our way as it relates to housing. Tonight, she's going to share her insights, her perspective on this, on how we could think about some reforms here as well as across the country that could help us unlock the supply of housing for families and communities here in Texas and beyond. My friends, join me in welcoming Jennifer Hernandez to the podium.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to try not to overstay my welcome. I'll be gone in 15 minutes. No. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit America. It's wonderful. I remember it from when I grew up. But I want to ask that you look on the bright side, because what we've done to ourselves in California has been a series of policy choices that we've made and inflicted on ourselves, which means they can be changed. We're not worried about the laws of physics. We're worried about the laws of various accidental, I think, and in some cases, unintended consequences. I have 4 substantive slides here. First one, though, on the title slide is, who's heard of the abundance movement or the book Abundance? It's a sort of left, center-left signaled notion. Ezra Klein, New York Times columnist, did a book on it, that takes the position, and he's a very liberal Democrat, that if you believe, as a liberal Democrat, in big government, the progressive movement, the liberal movement, has to take some responsibility for the fact that in the deepest blue cities and states, the government has failed the worst. Bad housing, bad education, bad crime, stagnant economic growth, out-migration. These are blue phenomenon. And so what is it about the way big government is now running itself that is broken? And that was a heresy. And one of the significant things the book talks about is housing. And so I want to sort of introduce this concept of, God forbid, a nonpartisan issue, because building more is a thing whose time has come. The abundance movement had its second convening in DC, and it was across the spectrum, MAGA far right, California far left, united around this idea of less expensive starter homes. It's just not political to think people need to live somewhere. And it becomes political if you make it, and California has made it, and we've broken it. So I am a land use environmental lawyer. It's been 40 years now, oh my God. Land use environmental law in California is not the political game it is in many parts of the country. It is a blood sport of nobody knows it, 5-year-old soccer game law. And it's that much of an open playing field. I'm proud to have worked with Joel and Wendell for many years now. We have an upcoming report coming out for Civitas on the kind of Latino population, which in a really quick way trends center left, but really close to that center. And so anything that looks too far left doesn't work, looks too far right doesn't work. And I gotta say, feels about that center that is just nonpartisan, right? It doesn't matter what the big picture edge issues are. Home ownership is something people should be able to do. It's really important. Education, being able to move to get a better job or a better home. These are core features of national polling and focus groups that Civitas sponsored, and we're very grateful and understand the report will be out in the next couple of months. But today's topic is really the housing crisis in the context of lessons learned from a one-party state. And the debate here is abundance on housing, even in the book, is really aimed at a sort of Brooklyn Berkeley kind of, people should live in apartments, walk, ride the bike, or take the bus, and contemplate their various appendages? I don't know. But it is not a homeownership agenda. It is not a mobility agenda. It is we live in cool, kind of better dorms now called apartments or condos, and we love our urban life. And everyone needs to do this. And it's that everyone needs to do this that's the scold part of the progressive left agenda that has infected California housing policy. And it doesn't work. So another Ezraism is this notion of everything bagel. It's like, let's do chargers. Okay, for electric vehicles, wonderful. Now let's do 17 things on top of let's do chargers. And by the time you're done with 17 things, guess what? There are no electric chargers. That's what we've done with housing policy. We have loaded it up with so much more than housing. So for example, it should be urban redevelopment, not, God forbid, a single parcel of land next to the freeway, unless it's been previously developed. That's kind of tied up with climate and environmentalism and this kind of, we're over our holding. California has developed less than 6% of the state for the nation's largest population. We have 6 of the 10 most dense regions in the country. But God forbid we move from 6% developed to 7% development. We will crater the world. And it's kind of this dogma. And the thing about California dogma is it spreads. Californians move, and we share our views, and we bring some money, and then we share our opinions with money. And suddenly your community is no longer the community you knew it to be. So it's, I think, relevant for you to think about this dogma and a couple others, because I'm going really fast here. We must increase population density in order to support public transit and walkable neighborhood communities. A beautiful campus, a walkable community. My general theory about progressive urbanists is they grew up in suburbs and they hated not being able to walk places. They went to college and they bloomed and they want to live in a college environment for life until approximately age 32 when they have their second kid, and then they don't want any part of it. But for those who can afford to still live a nice life in an urban area, this is what drives them. And I get it. It's a choice. People have made the choice to live in Manhattan for years. Most people choose not to. The fact is, we can't afford that form of life. There is no more expensive housing typology to build than a high-rise steel structure. 5-7 times more per square foot to build. There is no more expensive land than previously developed land, which already has some economic value, infrastructure and whatnot. These density projects, the 5/1 apartments, 1 story of not enough parking and 5 stories of housing, they rent at $4,000 a month. $4,000 a month is not affordable. Even though California has higher median income by a little bit, that is not an affordable rent. And it's only a rental. There's no homeownership part of this agenda except for townhome density urban redevelopment sites, which are about $1 million each, unless you're in Palo Alto or Newport Beach, in which case they're about 1.6 million. That is not an affordable home ownership product. So let's do missing middle. Missing middle, yay, it sounds so great. What's missing middle? Missing middle is as unaffordable because it has dense, more complex building form on existing urbanized land. There is no part of this housing dogma that works for a median income family. No part of it. Also, we have special interests. We're the only state in the nation where the construction building trades think they should be able to build residential. And when they do, it costs about 1/3 more, not for the labor part, but for the project cost. And we know that because they have to build certain kinds of affordable housing, so we've got the data. We also have all these really, really extremely exciting, cutting-edge building codes. So, we have one of the most temperate climates in the world, but God forbid we should have a window that opens and shuts. No. We're on the Starship Enterprise. We have to have sealed windows. We have to circulate them so we spend less energy heating and cooling the air that is heated or cooled enough with an open window. And God forbid you forget to change the filters and get Legionnaires, or you can't afford the country's most expensive electricity and running that fan 24/7 with those temperature controls. You can't afford it. Or running the heat pump with that electric. You can't afford it. And then you can't even open your window. That is a whole set of policy decisions that was made in complete contempt of working families such as my own. I'm the granddaughter of steel workers from Pittsburgh, California, because we used to have industry. My dad was permanently laid off at age 56. This is not responsive to people. All right, 200 plus laws later, we have absolutely fallen even further behind in housing production. We have this MacGuffin, for those of you who remember that term. We have fewer single-family homes being built every year, fewer apartments being built every year, but we have ADUs, backyard cottages or garage conversions. And with ADUs, we were holding kind of steady at 110,000 or so new units a year. But we are having meddled in policy land for 7 years with more than 200 laws further behind than we ever were. This is not rocket science as to how to create affordability. Wendell and Joel are among the nation's leaders on this. You can't do it without more land. You need land to expand. You can't do it without water and sewer. Hey, dudes, you can't. If you want to solve for a physical problem like housing, as opposed to a mental problem like, large language models, I don't even understand, you have to live in the physical world of atoms. And we need space, and we need things like water and sewage treatment, as well as school systems and other stuff. So we have solutions, we know solutions. We also have incredibly lucrative, if you charge by the hour as I do, opportunities for lawyers in this space if you want to move over. The highest percentage of CEQA, our version of a once environmental law, lawsuits, which can be filed by anyone for any reason, labor unions, business competitors, anything. Anybody can file, alleging that more should be done to protect the environment. Top target, housing, top target apartments. Where? Why, my goodness, in whiter, wealthier neighborhoods. Now, is that about protecting the environment? If we read about this in California as happening in some unknown southern state, we would be on the buses to the ramparts saying these people are abusing what they're calling environmental law to keep people who can only rent out of their neighborhoods. And who are those people? Demographically, those people are browner and younger in California. We would be to the ramparts with our California values. But instead, we camouflage them with this environmentalist rhetoric that was first observed by an MIT professor back in, believe it or not, the first housing crisis we declared in 1982. I don't have to keep going on. You should feel happy with where you're living, and that your challenges are at a still more manageable scale and require political will. From far-right MAGA to relatively moderate on the California spectrum, progressives at the Abundance Conference, let's build starter homes, let's build more energy, let's get the infrastructure right, we need more water, we need all of these things, transportation. There is a nonpartisan agenda here. It's an agenda that's very people-oriented and still protects the environment. It is, I think, an opportunity for you to call out some of the worst of California's excesses and say no. Just call them for what they are. They're anti-people. We have a huge segment of Democratic Socialists of America. Our left is not your left. You don't have this left. And that left is the one edge of our political spectrum, and a liberal is on the extreme right. It's that Elon Musk sort of, spectrum. It is not easy to turn the tide. San Francisco's bottomed out. Why? They have a ton of money, and they have, thank God, Chinese parents who need schools to function and believe in home ownership. And between the demographics of the Asian voters and the money of the tech bros, it's bottomed out. That's a rarefied opportunity politically. It doesn't exist even in most of California. We can do better. I'm dedicated to trying to do better. And I urge you to not allow this virus, this dogma, to create further havoc in what I think is still a noble, important, and really critical problem to solve, which is housing in Texas. Thank you.
Thank you for bearing with us, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Ryan Streeter. I'm the Executive Director of the Civitas Institute, and as Stephen said, it's great to be able to co-host this with the LBJ School and see such a great crowd here. And I'm really pleased to be joined by two fantastic mayors, Mayor Maddie Parker of Fort Worth and Mayor Kirk Watson of our home city here in Austin, Texas, and I'm looking forward to our discussion together. We'll try to keep this on time and also try to accommodate some of your questions, so we'll kind of move through this quickly. I won't belabor the introductions for sake of time, but I want to, you probably know something about both of these mayors, but by way of introduction, Mayor Maddie Parker is currently in her third term and was first elected to lead the nation's now 11th largest city in 2021. Mayor Parker's priorities have been bolstering the city's economic development, expanding education opportunity, improving public safety, and preserving the city's rich heritage. When she was first elected, she was the youngest mayor and the first millennial to lead a major American city. So on behalf of all Gen Xers, I apologize for everything that we said about the millennials' entitlement and all that. Mayor Parker is a licensed attorney with more than 18 years of experience in national, state, and local public affairs and has a BA from the University of Texas at Austin and a law degree from a school in College Station. Mayor Watson won his first term as Austin mayor in 1997 and was reelected with 84% of the vote for his reelection, which is, I think, a higher approval rating than most of us have with our families, so it's impressive. He's widely recognized for bringing together a variety of factions to produce the kind of transformative growth that Austin's known for. And he then spent 13 years in the Texas Senate, where he served on multiple committees and led on education and healthcare and government transparency. But then in 2023, the people of Austin called him back into service by electing him mayor once again. I was here 1 month before your election and 2 months after, before I'd moved back to Austin, and the visible change was incredible, and that helped make the decision for my wife and I easy to move back here 2 years ago. So thank you for that. Mayor Watson grew up in North Texas, graduated from Baylor and Baylor Law School, where he graduated first in his class. Okay, welcome to both of you. I've got questions for the two of you that you can take turns answering, and then we'll also give our audience a chance to ask some questions. And I apologize in advance if we can't get through everyone's questions, because we do have limited time in this lightning round, as Stephen said, that we structured today to be. Before we talk about housing policy in particular, I just want to talk about growth at the city level, because we are blessed to have two mayors with us who preside over two of the fastest growing cities in the country. I mean, when you look at the top 10 fastest growing metro areas, two of them are represented right here. I've moved around a lot. My family and I have moved around a lot. We've always seemed to move to places where there's lots of construction cranes. Construction cranes have become my indicator of vitality. And I think I just like places that are building. And Austin is one of those places, and Fort Worth is one of those. And so what I wanted to hear you both talk about at the outset is when you think about the economic growth of the cities that you preside over, what do you think about the most, positive or negative? Because I know there are both. And I'd just be curious to know, when people are talking to you a lot about the growth of the city, you've got your own priorities. What's the top of mind for a mayor who's presiding over a city that's known for its growth?
Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you all very much for the invitation to be here. I think the question, importantly for me, and we get this a lot, as you can imagine, as a mayor that's now the 10th largest city. We just passed the city of Jacksonville. And for our Austinites in the audience, we're now bigger than the city of Austin as the, as the 4th largest city in Texas. But you can imagine for those folks that live in Fort Worth in our city, there's always a level of concern that permeates the question, what are you doing about growth? Because it impacts every single aspect of a city that's run well. And I do think we're a city that is run incredibly well and focused on the basics of city government. But as a comparison, and I know Mayor Watson has been there as well to see it, I went last summer to Detroit, Michigan for a Mayor's Institute. And Mayor Dugan was an excellent host and toured the city and showed us downtown. And by the way, if you haven't been to Detroit lately, I highly recommend you go visit. It's a beautiful city that it's on its comeback, and there's so many exciting things happening. But Mayor Dugan did an excellent job giving us the history of his city that was built for 1.6 million people, that now hovers well south of a million, more like 650 to 700,000 people. If you're a city in America that it's not growing, you are dying. And so in Fort Worth, we try to keep that in perspective and focus on policies that are smart today and into the future. And as Mayor Watson can tell you better than most, because he's been mayor and then left office and come back, you oftentimes are instituting policies at a foundational level that you may not necessarily benefit from, but you absolutely know how important they'll be 10 to 20 years from now. And it's probably a big reason why Kirk came back to office, right? He knows how important policymaking is. And last thing I'll say is this, and turn it over to Kirk, is I say this a lot in Fort Worth, and I mean it. The things that matter in city government are not sexy, right? They are streetlights and potholes and making sure you have construction cones and police officers and firefighters and building a city that people want to live in. And as a result, in Fort Worth, people have voted with their feet to live in our amazing city. And so as all of the concern around growth, and Texas should be concerned about that, right? This is why we're here around affordable housing and preparing for the future. But you also have to really institute those policies that really enable affordable housing to even be part of the conversation, because you're a city that's growing and thriving.
Well, I'll just piggyback on that because I agree with all of that. And what I'll say is that I say it frequently, that in Austin, Texas, our biggest challenges are a result of success. And that is, we are growing. And I agree that if you're not growing, you need to be worried about it. And so it's a question of managing growth, managing the success in order to be able to continue to do that. I was, as has been pointed out, I was mayor 25 years ago when Austin was becoming a big international city. Today, like it or not, Austin is a big international city. And we all have our nostalgia, we all have the kind of things that we want to remember, but if we want to continue to be a successful city, we have, we're not managing decay. So what we need to be doing is we need to be doing the basics. Now, I also think about two other things, at least two other things when I think about managing success. One is, how do you manage success in a way that you stay a complete city, that everybody can afford to be a part of this city? And we're going to talk about affordability, but that is something that keeps me awake at night, because with the great success, it changes the market. It changes the market. The other is, how do you have the number of people you need to take care of the basics? So for example, with infrastructure, we've got about $25 billion worth of infrastructure projects going on right now, and we have to have the people to build those. So what we're attempting to do is make sure we're training enough people to do that, and that adds people that can then afford to live in the city, that don't have to move out of the city. So we try to kill two birds with one stone, if you will, in that regard. But one is, how do you manage the affordability? The other is, how do you make sure you have the population necessary to take care of the basics? Because if you're just a city of only the very rich that moved here from other places, then you're going to be in trouble.
Very good. And you can hang on to that. I'll go back and forth here. Before getting into kind of more details of specific kind of housing policy and the things that you've pursued, I wanted to talk just more about just kind of the kind of housing supply that you think we need more of, or that you've seen in your particular cities. I'm thinking of that really important demographic, at least I think it's a really important demographic, of like 25 to 35-year-olds. I mean, there's a big difference between the time you're 25 and you're 35. During that time, if you've made a move during that time, especially as you're getting closer to the 30, 35 range, you're probably going to be putting down some roots, right? And that's a big choice. And both of you have attracted that demographic hugely. And it was probably 9 years ago now, we did a study on Texas urbanism. I just realized Cullum Clark did the Dallas chapter, Joel Cutkin did Houston, I did Austin, and Wendell did the numbers for all of us to keep us out of trouble. It's like getting the band back together. And discovered even then that Austin had more 25 to 35-year-olds in the MSA here than the San Jose MSA at the time even. So that's even increased, and you think that's a large swath of Silicon Valley. So those people come and they stay, but to your point, with the challenges that growth brings, and particularly when it comes to the kinds of incomes you're attracting, you need to have housing for these people that actually want to have. It's a first-time home buyer, and right. the young workers that want to live, experience the American dream. And that seems like where we're having a real problem right now across the country, not just in our cities. So when you think of the type of housing, we can talk more in a minute about specific policies themselves, but like the kind of housing that you think we need more of, and then how we produce it. That'd be great to hear.
Well, I'll start with the why of that, and I was saying we're sometimes very nostalgic in Austin, but one of the things that people ask me all the time is, how do you keep Austin Austin? And what I tell them is, we have to keep Austin a city that you can keep the young people wanting to stay here and being able to stay here. We're sitting in what I consider to be a fountain of youth. Every year in Austin, Texas, we have a whole lot of new young people show up. They bring their new music, their new thinking, their new ideas, greater diversity, different culture, and then they say, like they've done for decades, I never want to leave. Well, the question is, how do we make Austin affordable enough and have the living opportunities so that they can? And then when they marry, they start having children. And so we need to have more ability to have starter homes. One of the things, and we can talk about the whys, what's in a minute, but one of the big things that I think we've done well in the last 2 years is changing lot size minimums so that you don't have to have McMansions. You don't have to have a 5,750 square foot lot to build a single family dwelling on. You can now have an 1,800 square foot lot. Well, that means 35-year-olds have greater opportunity to buy their first homes, like, frankly, Liz and I did when we first got here all those years ago. So I think the focus has to be on, and of course you're going to build multifamily and those kinds of things, but you also have to be focused on things like single family, but you got to make it where people will be able to afford it and be able to start and not need a McMansion.
I think to Kirk's point, you have to say yes to everything. And in Fort Worth, we're a city that's 350 square miles, so we're very sprawled, and we're only half developed. So with that, you can see where Fort Worth's headed, and we're in the middle of a comprehensive planning process to really rethink, to your point, what type of housing do we need to be incentivizing and really working alongside private developers, nonprofit developers to be in their city. I know we're going to talk about the regulatory environment, but that is incredibly important. In Fort Worth, we have strived to be a get-to-yes city. From that starts with development services, your water department, all of these departments that can really stymie opportunity for all types of housing growth. NIMBYism is real, and I know that that's something that every city really experiences. The Texas legislature this last session passed several pieces of legislation. We could debate whether all of them will get the intended consequences, but some of them are around by right, zoning by right, especially around multifamily. The one nuance I think is important for us to remember, though, and because you mentioned that 25 to 35, Ryan, a 25-year-old starter home, they're not thinking about schools. They better believe they will be at 35 when their kids start school. And so, in my opinion, the city has a great program around neighborhood improvement zones that have the right incentive levels in place to have you build an infill, foreclosed lot, build a new home in a neighborhood that's up and coming or redeveloping, which is wonderful. But if you don't have schools and education opportunities for those students in those zip codes, those families will move out at age 35, 36, 37, and go to the outskirts of your city where school districts are higher performing. And so that's something that every single urban area in America is really grappling with. It's certainly something in Fort Worth. I know Austin also has pockets of concern. And so I think it needs to be an underpinning of a conversation around affordable housing, because you can build all you want to in some of these neighborhoods. But in many ways, I think it's a policy malpractice for also to be thinking about what this opportunity for education and students that are going to be living in those homes at one point, and families that will move out of them long term. And you're back in that same cycle that you kind of created in trying to redevelop neighborhoods as well.
Thank you. And so when you think more specifically about policies themselves, then, along those lines, getting a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of policy details, like rule changes or certain specific policies that you think if you could do them en masse, that would make a huge difference in your own city or in other cities across the country. What's your kind of top three, top list now?
Well, it's a menu of options. I think one thing the city of Fort Worth has just embarked upon in the last 2 years was a partnership with philanthropy to, a real community land trust in the city of Fort Worth. Our first project is Old Seminary Housing. It's 200 houses, some redevelopment, some new build, 80% to 120% AMI for home ownership. And of course, those homes will allow a family to build home equity as a starter home. But when those homes sell, they stay in the land trust in perpetuity, which allows you to really experiment with the opportunity in an urban core. We also selected neighborhoods where the schools were higher performing, giving parents a menu of options and choices there. So that would be probably number one. I mentioned your neighborhood improvement zones, which are really innovative ways across our city, a cross-section of opportunity for developers and individual homeowners. We also have our Housing Finance Corporation that has purchased lots and holding them and working with nonprofits, churches, individual landholders to redevelop in the urban core. I won't talk about multifamily because that's kind of happening naturally, but we have some really innovative projects, everything from permanent supportive housing to workforce housing that is of note in the city of Fort Worth. And then lastly is what we've done in Stop 6, Texas. Stop 6 Fort Worth was our HUD Housing Choice Grant that we applied for in 2020, 2021. We received the $35 million, and all in, you're going to see over $400 million of private development happen in historic Stop 6. Cavill Place was one of two traditional public housing developments in our city that we went through a rental assistance demonstration project. And I don't have time to describe how complicated this was, but it would not have happened without a private developer at the table, and of course Fourth Housing Solutions has been that possible. And what's really great, you've now seen families, most recently seniors that were probably multi-generational living in Stop 6, being able to return home to live in senior housing and Cavill Place in their community because of that partnership. And so I think those priorities have really now beared fruit, and it's up to us to kind of continue that work in other parts of the city.
Thanks. Mayor Watson.
Sure. First of all, there's some in the room that get it because they've lived through Austin the way Austin's done it. But I would say that we had a de facto two-party system when it came to housing in Austin, Texas, until about 2.5 years ago. And the de facto two-party system was, I don't want to put the labels on it because I always worry about what that does. But it was a de facto two-party system that was in many ways stopping us being able to put into effect policy. So I think it's not a policy thing, but I think the politics of the situation was that we had to figure out how we were going to get any of it done, or we were not going to get anything done. And I think we've broken through that logjam. So the three policies, I would start with the regulatory aspect of it. When I came into office 2.5 years ago, 2 3/4 years now, but who's counting? When I came in, one of the big things I wanted to do was revamp our regulatory scheme. It was broken. It's still not where I want it. We're still making improvements on it. But it was badly screwed up. And so what we did is we basically did a peer review, if you will, not a peer review, but a performance review from top to bottom of the site planning process, which was what we were told was our worst offender. And we said, you got 9 months to help us figure it out. It was McKinsey. We brought in McKinsey. They came to me early, right after I was elected, and they said, we want to get known better in the community. How do we do that? And I said, well, what I would do if I were you is I'd say, Mayor, we've heard you talk about the screwed up site plan process and the fact that you want to do a sunset review of it. We want to do that for you. And they said, oh, okay. And I said, and then I would say, Mayor, we want to do it for free. We ran into a little bit of difficulty on that part. But the point is, we've made huge change. the city of Austin was adding so much cost to what housing cost in this community in the name of a lot of what you were talking about, that we had to make that change. The second thing is, I mentioned it a minute ago, I actually believe that what will be one of the biggest differences will be what we've done with regard to minimum lot size. I think that will make a huge difference. And then the third that I would say, it would be 3 by right, and being able to come in and put that much development in single family zoned areas. Now, I agree with Mayor Parker that some of the things that we saw in the last session of the legislature theoretically we would agree with, but the consequences of what some of that is going to do is going to cause real problems. And I think that the next step in the policy approaches will be making sure they're working the way we intended. If what we do is we feel like we're on the train and we're getting all this done and we need to do, people all the time ask me, what's next? What's next? Because we've done so much good. What I say what's next is, let's make sure this is working. Because if we're not making sure it works, then we're going to create that de facto, we're going to prove right some of those that were saying you're going to screw this up. And so we need to take a deep breath, stabilize what we're doing, and get it done, even as some who are applauding what we've done want to see even more.
That's really great. I'd like to just talking about the governing through these sorts of changes, and you mentioned the forces of NIMBYism. I'm thinking of Jennifer's opening comments about this kind of what's really become kind of an astonishing bipartisan agreement, or cross-ideological agreement about what we need to do, because that's relatively recent, and it took about 20 years of all kinds of research and coalition building to kind of get there. And so it's great that we have people gathering at a national abundance conference agreeing about this. What I'm wondering about is at the local level. My first policy job was with Mayor Steve Goldsmith in Indianapolis, and I worked at the state and federal level above that, and concluded that it's still the toughest job what you do, because your constituents can be there protesting in your face that afternoon after you make a proclamation or a decision. Are you seeing in your cities this kind of agreement? I mean, is the NIMBY, what we call the NIMBY issue, are there examples of the way that people who have been opposed to certain types of development have gotten on board with it, that we can find some encouragement in, or are the forces still just kind of like they've always been?
Well, maybe it's just too soon, but my response to that is, I've not seen a major coming together. In fact, I've been disappointed in that. I came up, again, having done this as long as I've done it, I had a lot of friends that are no longer friends over things that we've passed with regard to housing, that will not speak to me when we're in a room together, because they saw what they consider to be the sanctity of the neighborhood. And I've been very careful. I mean, it's always going to get said, and I'm not going to convince anybody not to. But I tell people, you can't use the word NIMBY around me. Now, you can, but you're moderating a panel, so go ahead. But because I worry that the label itself robs us of empathy and puts us in a situation where we're not willing to listen to why somebody might really be concerned. And many times they might be concerned in a way that, well, I'm just not going to be able to, I just don't agree with you. But if we just put the label on and say, well, they're NIMBY and they're always going to be against it, we may miss out good ideas, and we may miss things that we could do so that they would come together. Affordability is a rallying cry. Affordability is a good rallying cry and something that we can build around. But I will say that maybe it's just, like I say, too soon and too new. And then we've had, in my mind, a couple of missteps. And I mean, some of my friends out in the audience know how I feel about DB 90. And it's it has created more problems than I think it has fixed, and we need to fix it faster than we're fixing it. But again, there's now that you got it, I ain't giving it up kind of stuff. And I think that what happened in the legislature, when people start pushing back on some of those things, we're going to continue to see those divisions. That's part of the reason I said what I said in response to the last question. We're going to have to now be very smart about how we institute these things, or we're just going to keep the division, maybe even grow it in some instances.
Wow, so every November there's columns in the New York Times about how to talk about national politics with family members. Sounds like we need like columns about in our local papers about how to talk about housing policy around that Thanksgiving.
Yeah. I think for my experience, I'm kind of curious what y'all have seen in Austin as well, that, to use the term again that Kirk doesn't like, NIMBYism, here's what I've seen lately, is that usually your demographic is your older, more established families that have been a part of neighborhoods and homeowners associations are the loudest voices and very organized that come to City Hall out of concern for their neighborhoods. And then the other faction you hear from, I loved what Jennifer said about the dogma and this ideology. They're very organized politically, and they've just chosen this issue as their issue du jour of the day. And they're literally stealing headlines out of California to come down to City Hall and scream and yell about. So how far apart do you think those two audiences are, right? And so as a result of that, the toxicity is so high, no one's listening to anybody. I would encourage, and maybe this is a kind of a project for Civitas and those of you in the room that really care about this, oftentimes the very best ideas around, let's take housing policies since we're discussing, is occurring at a national and state level. And it never, ever trickles down to a city where your practitioners and people like myself and the folks in my housing department and your water department and your development services department are actually the ones trying to build housing. They're usually not bureaucrats. They're usually really ready for a great idea. They just don't know any of this exists. And so in order to answer your question, Ryan, to kind of break through what we're seeing, you see it all the time on any various issue, on any zoning case, I do think there's additional help from policymakers and think tanks like this one to help you create more consistent policy. Because let's be honest, if Texas is going to continue this route towards best for all and statewide legislation that's regulatory, that is impacting cities, then you need to make sure that your cities actually know how to implement said policies and work alongside your state legislators, because right now they're not talking. And the most recent example around multifamily, which we're getting all kind of NIMBYism, and we're like, hey, you got to talk to your legislator because now we can't actually stop that case. It's going to happen. Is we have no ability to really regulate from an infrastructure standpoint, right? So now we can't actually sit down with the developer and say, hey, this road needs to be 4 lanes, not 2 lanes. You need a stoplight and a turn lane, because they don't have to go through the zoning process. Yeah, you can hold them up in the site process. That's a whole nother issue that now we have a stop clock on the legislature. So I could go on a tangent, as you can tell. And so cities like Fort Worth, and I know like Austin, are so hungry to be at the table and learn from policymakers that are in this room and others, and make sure we're making the right decisions. Because the reality is, for Texas to avoid what California did, that's the type of thing you need. That consistent regulatory framework is really needed.
That's great. I was actually going to bring this up as the next question, and I'll just do this quickly, and then this will be my last question before I turn it over to you. So we leave a few minutes for audience questions. So be thinking about what you'd like to ask the mayors. But it's this question of what, if anything, state policymakers can and should do, and even federal, which is farther removed. There are some proposals out there, and I won't go through them now, about what the federal government might be able to do to encourage the right kinds of policies at the local level, which we can all be maybe wary of, but also what states should do. I'm just curious if you have additional thoughts, Mayor, just on what you think they should do or stay out of.
Sure. Well, I'm not Pollyanna because I've been in politics now for over 20 years, so I realize, and now is like the heightened period of time we're in, and nothing is bipartisan anymore. But if I could, I would encourage the legislature, especially in that interim charge planning process that both the Senate and the House go through, is rather than just appointing committee members from the Senate and the House, and no offense, most of them are not like Kirk Watson, who served as a senator for 13 years but had experience in local government, you would create a slate of people at the table that are Democrats and Republican mayors from across the state and state legislators that really understand and care about housing policy, and put people like Jennifer at the table to say, what could Texas build if we were all on the same page? Because wouldn't it be beautiful if you start a legislative session with like 10 policies that every major city in Texas was for rather than against, and you had Democrats and Republicans at the table saying, hey, we're going to pass this bill in the first few weeks of session and start implementation immediately rather than fighting through committee hearings. And I do think you could do that if you could convince the right people at the table, and again, having a system like Civitas and UT Austin to say, encouraging, hell, throw in TPPF too. Like, we can all be at the same table. If we really want this to be effective and Texas to look different, I do think you're going to have to try something different around these issues.
She's exactly right. And I'll add a couple of things that may be, maybe I shouldn't. One is the legislature is going to have to quit acting like cities are all stupid and evil. It's just not the case. That's where the people live, and they're choosing to live there, and they're choosing to live in different cities for different reasons. And it's okay for the cities to be different. But right now, you're not going to be able to achieve what I think is a very good suggestion and good results if there is a bias against the cities. The second is you got to include those cities. I'll underscore it. I'll put it to you this way: just because I was in the Senate, I didn't feel any smarter than when I was in the mayor's office, right? In fact, you don't know, you're not practicing it, so you're not getting to know exactly how it might have unintended consequences. And let me just say, what you don't want is a bill to be passed and then everybody saying, let me tell you how this is not going to work, and then you have to write letters and say, well, here's what I really intended. That's not the best way to make public policy. So that is the sort of suggestion we need to have. I worry that the lack of bipartisanship is influencing what happens between the legislature and cities. Back to your point, there is some coalition around housing and affordability that's both Democrat and Republican. Maybe they're coming at it for different reasons, but I don't care as long as they're coming together. But as long as the legislature is anti-city because of partisan politics, we're going to have some difficulty with that.
Got it. Very good. Okay. Just a couple minutes for maybe a couple of questions, and again, apologies in advance for not being able to get around to everyone who might have something to say. Right here. And wait for the mic to come to you. This is being recorded, so you have to be okay with that if you're asking a question. It also means wait for the mic.
I have a question for my friend Mayor Watson. I really like the minimum lot size. You brought it up a couple of times. We have had historically in Austin a fairly small supply of lots smaller than 5750 for obvious reasons, because nobody could do anything with those. What can we do to create a larger supply of smaller lots? Because currently the process for subdividing lots is still, shall we say, somewhat cumbersome.
Well, I think you answered your own question. And I think the first thing we are, as many people will tell you, and you probably already know, and I said it a minute ago, part of what we are attempting to do is totally revamp the regulatory process. We started with site planning. We're not as far as I would like to see us on some other things. And in fact, Alexis Garcia, who's on my staff, is in the back of the room and is my land use person, my lead land use person. She's been on the phone today fixing some things that need to be fixed. But I think what we need to do is we need to make it easier. I think a big part of the problem, the best way to start is to get out of the way. And a big part of the problem is that we're in our own way when it comes to that. And I think that's the answer to the question.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Mayor, Mrs. Mayor. You've spoken quite a bit about regulatory aspects. Is anyone doing work in tax policy vis-a-vis property taxation and how that can affect growth? I'm a native Pennsylvanian, and we have cities like Harrisburg and places like that who have split rate taxation for the property taxes, where the land value is at a higher rate than the improvements to the land. And they seem to have weathered the big, housing crisis in the late 2000s better than a lot of places. So are people looking at things like that where we can amend and modernize property tax structure and other taxation in order to be, let's say, pro-smart growth?
Well, the Texas legislature loves to work on property tax policy in the state of Texas. But as I try to remind people in our city, in Texas, we're a two-legged stool, of course. We do not have a state income tax. And your city government does not receive money from the state of Texas to fund city government. It is sales tax and special revenues and mostly property taxes. So actually, before I came up here, I checked this. For a house in Fort Worth that costs $237,000, their property tax bill is just south of $1,600 a year for the city of Fort Worth, so $1,587. 1/3 of their entire property tax bill goes to their city. That's for your police officers, your firefighters, your street lights, your streets, your libraries, your parks. I could go on. The rest of it goes to other funds, including school districts, right? That is such an important thing to get across, because you cannot properly fund city government without some kind of sustainable fund, and there's nowhere else to come from right now. I do think one thing that we're not looking at closely enough in Texas right now is homeowners insurance, because you've seen huge rises recently that absolutely are impacting homeowners and renters. And I know they dabbled in it a bit this last session, but they have not fixed it. And it's actually impacting rural Texas more so than urban Texas right now. And so to tag on your question, that's an open-ended problem we have in the state that's impacting the ability to afford a home. And then lastly, more so than tax policy, quite frankly, is labor and materials. And because of the issues around immigration right now, we're all experiencing a shortage on the labor front, and something the state of Texas is really going to have to grapple with.
That's a really good answer, and all I would add to it is that tax policy as it applies to cities, that really the only thing that the legislature has spent a lot of time talking about is how to keep us from getting taxes. And in fact, through this whole year, what we have discussed at the legislature is how to reduce the amount of revenue you can get from property taxes before you have to go to the voters. And in Austin, 100%, all of it, toto, of our property taxes goes to public safety. 70% of our sales tax revenue goes to public safety, which means everything else is what we have to take care of everything else out of the rest of that. We're in negotiations with our firefighters right now, and they're demanding a wage increase that is around, the minimum is about 5% per year, and we're capped at 3.5% in what we can do without going to the voters. Well, that's difficult. And when you have a school district that is sending so much of its money to the state, the local taxpayer, the tax burden becomes a real burden, but it's not so much the city that's doing it, but yet the city is the one that people are demanding the services from. We need to be looking at unique things. So I remember the first time I was mayor, I had this great idea about people, let's say you had a 2-1, and you said, Mayor, we really liked our 2-1, but when we bought the 2-1, we were newly married, we didn't have children, and now we've got a couple of kids, and but we can't afford to move up. We can't find a house to move. And my thought was, what if we could let you add on to that house? You could afford the loan to build a third bedroom and a second bath. What if we let you do that, and we would incentivize you doing that by not increasing your property taxes based upon the increased square footage of that house? And I'll never forget saying that to the city attorney, and him looking at me and saying, Mayor, that's really smart. And I thought, yeah. And he said, it's illegal. Okay. Those are the kinds of things we ought to be thinking about. We ought to be thinking about how we would go about doing those things. You know, one of the issues that we're facing, and we're going to be talking about very soon, to Mayor Parker's point, is you want to put an ADU, you want to do that? Well, we'll add to the cost of that by requiring a separate meter for those kinds of things. I mean, we've got to look at all those costs, but when it comes to property taxes, we're pretty much helpless. The legislature needs to do that, and they're not thinking about housing policy.
One thing I should add is we do have CCPD in the city of Fort Worth, so we use our sales tax pennies. Half goes to transit, and the other half penny goes to Crime Control Prevention District. That's been in place since the 90s, and we just went back to voters for 10-year extension. So it really does help alleviate some of that burden on public safety for police specifically over to your sales tax, which of course does help mitigate a bit.
Thank you so much, both of you, for spending time with us here. Really do appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it. Very good. Thanks very much. You both have very hard jobs, and we appreciate the job you're doing. Just give us a couple minutes while we get the next group up here, and stay with us.
I wish I had the ability of my rabbi who can silence a crowd quickly, but I don't have those gifts. So what I'd like to do is just, what this panel is really about is what the facts are, sort of showing you what Jennifer was talking about. And the biggest issue, just to start with, is when we make policy, or when policy is being made or manufactured, we seem to completely forget what the people want. And this has been, I think, one of the biggest problems with the urban planning world. It reminds me a little bit of, they asked Ted Turner's, person who managed Ted Turner's Buffalo Ranch, where do you take the buffalo to go? He said, you go wherever the buffalo want to go. And that's really what I think has been missing, is sort of an understanding of what people want. So when we in California see people moving, now please don't take this wrong, I don't think there's any place as nice to live as California. Why do people move to other states? They move to other states because the thing they want, which is generally speaking, a single family house or at least an affordable apartment, they can't get. And so what I'd like to do is sort of start on how this is happening, quantify it, and then sort of deal with some of the issues here in Texas and on affordability. So I'd like to introduce Wendell Cox. Wendell he and Jennifer and I have worked together for many years, and Wendell's, he publishes the Demographia Affordability study. Just to give you an idea, we just looked, there are 5 billion hits on that site, because it's basically the catalog of affordability on a global scale, and it's quite an amazing thing, and we now publish it at Chapman University. But let me introduce Wendell so we can get this thing going.
Let me see. Yeah, and as I try to figure out what's going on here. Oh, yeah, here we are. I should say also that since California has been mentioned, I was born within 2 miles of City Hall. So was my father and my 3 children. I live in Illinois now and have lived in Illinois for 40 years and been very happy. In any event, much of what I'm going to talk about comes out of our work in our Demographia International Housing Affordability Survey. It's like we cover 97 major metropolitan markets in 8 countries, and what we look at is housing affordability. And we need to all understand what housing affordability is. You cannot talk about housing affordability without talking about income. Price you don't talk about unless you are also talking about income. We, in putting this together over the last 20 years, used something called the median multiple, which is the median house price divided by the median household income. And that's what you see. Let's see here, what happened to my, oh, here we are. Sorry. Okay, you can see we put together a standard for rating housing and affordability. We went back to 1970. That's before most of the really counterproductive regulation that has occurred in the United States occurred. And in 1969, out of the more than currently 50 metropolitan areas of more than 1 million people, there were only 2 that had a median multiple of more than 3. In other words, the house price is 3 times the income. And the only places that wasn't the case was in New York and Honolulu, where it was fairly close. Now we have some we are rating impossibly affordable, impossibly unaffordable, where the ratio is 9 times. So that's how bad it is, and we are in the process, perhaps, of destroying the middle class. We certainly have destroyed the middle class in Seattle, in Portland, in Denver, and in Miami, and surely across most of California at this point. This slide shows you the median multiple for 3 areas. The black line is markets, and by a market I mean a metropolitan area. So if I were talking about Dallas, I would be talking about DFW, not Dallas or Fort Worth, and not McKinney. The point is, if you look at that black line and how the house price has gone up relative to incomes, and those are California metro areas with a ratio of more than 5. Remember, in 1969, almost every metropolitan area had under 3. The red line is markets that have median multiples over 5, but are not in California. This sort of shows you the problem in California that Jennifer did so well in describing to us. And then the green line, and that green line included all of the major Texas metropolitan areas, is where the median multiple was under 5. So I'm not here in any way to criticize what you've done in California, in Texas. You have done an incredible job. You just need to do more of it, as it were. The housing affordability range between markets, between these major metropolitan markets, has risen between 1.7 years. That is to say, the least affordable market was 1.7 years more expensive than the most expensive. I got that mixed up. The most expensive was 1.7 years more costly than the lowest cost market, than the highest cost market. And notice that ratio has now gone up to 8.9 times. Now, one of the things we've noticed in doing this work around the world at this time, all of the most important markets have something that, thank God, you do not have in Texas. It's called the urban growth boundary. It's called restrictions, and the whole purpose of urban growth boundaries, you draw a line around the city. And you don't allow any building outside the city. And the result of that is you drive the demand up, and the prices go up very much. But it's not just that the prices of the land on the periphery of the metropolitan area, it's not just that those prices go up. That increment of going up that you see on this chart extends throughout the metropolitan areas. And the great, I'm not a real fan of densification. I don't think it will work. But the fact is, it can work in some circumstances. But let me tell you about one of the things that's not being talked about in the United States with respect to the idea that we need to be densifying everything. Take Vancouver, BC. In 1969, 1970, the median multiple in Vancouver, in the city of Vancouver, was about 3, or a little bit above that. Now it's over 12. And the Canadian Housing and Mortgage Corporation, which is a national government firm, provincial government, says that the Vancouver house prices are only 1/4 of the house and land costs. In other words, land is 80% of the issue. Now, land is not 80% of the problem you have in Texas. It is in some places. San Francisco is close to it, and others like that. Glaser and Malloy in 2013 did some review of housing prices and lot prices, including finished lots. And you can see that line that goes way up that's the house price, and the line that goes fairly steady is the land costs. The land costs haven't gone up much at all. And what's going on is these urban containment regulations, principally urban growth boundaries, drive the price up, just like the price at the gasoline station goes up when the producing OPEC, for example, shut us down before many of you were born. But that really happened. Now, I may have skipped one, sorry. Oh yeah, here we have, the National Association of Realtors puts out data on how much income you need to have to qualify for the median priced house in the metropolitan areas that they measure. And you can see there are a bunch of them that are down around the median price. They're not a lot below, but in fact, in 1969, the median priced house could be purchased by the median household income and still can be in some places, including Dallas-Fort Worth. You see Denver, Portland, Seattle, Miami, San Jose, look at that. Look at how much those land costs have basically forced up the qualifying income. So, and it's one of the things that really infuriates me is to hear people in Washington talking about housing policy. They can't do anything about it. Housing policy is most importantly run at the local and state level, and there are no national strategies that are going to solve the problem. Now, this is a shocking headline. And I must say, when I saw it the first time, I was really shocked because the urban planning community and much of has been very much opposed to anything that they consider to be sprawling. And the leading housing reporter for the New York Times put this story together in the New York Times Magazine, and basically what they said, the word sprawl has become an epithet for garish, reckless growth, but to fix the housing crisis, the country needs more of it. And the reason the country needs more of it is you have to restore the market at the periphery of the market. You don't want this anymore. You've got to have this. And what is encouraging about what Connor put together here is it indicates that some people inside, housing insiders, are beginning to recognize the problem. And, in my view, you've got to restore the market throughout. We've got distorted housing markets. I tell people, though, the minimum we must do is not make the situation worse. The minute you hear anybody in Texas telling you to limit growth in the rural areas, you need to tell them no, because you could become California just like they obviously have done. Now, the interesting thing, as Joel indicated, was the strong domestic migration. That's people moving from one part of the country to another, moving from Dallas-Fort Worth to Kansas City or the other way around. Here is what has gone on in the last 4 years in net domestic migration. These are comparing the urban core counties, so that would be Tarrant County and Dallas County and Travis County and Bexar County and others, of course. But in any event, what we've seen in just those 4 years is a decline of 3.3 million net domestic migrants, people moving to places outside the core cities. Then the suburban counties have gained about 900,000, but the shocking things is how many people are moving completely outside of the major metropolitan area. This is something we've identified also in Canada. So, but the fact is, my sense is not only are people moving out of the expensive places to find less expensive housing, they're moving to get the housing they want, because you cannot build the housing the market wants in California. As Joel indicated, they have basically forgotten about the public. Now, one area one particular area where I think Texas is particularly to be complimented, and to some degree also Colorado, is the development of municipal utility districts. They have made it possible to keep the costs in especially cities like Houston where these private developments, the municipal utility districts are put together, and housing is created and provided and has kept the costs down. We, in reports in California, have basically suggested the idea of making it possible to put together municipal utility districts in the Central Valley of California, where housing affordability is bad, but nowhere near as bad as the coast. The point is, as you can probably imagine, nobody's listening to us, but again, there are some hopeful signs, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you.
So now I have to say that Wendell, I think those are facts that it's amazing that those facts are not at the beginning of every conference on housing, and I was so thrilled to have Colin Clark here from the Bush Center up in Dallas, particularly because in the story that Connor wrote in the New York Times that Wendell's mentioned, the star performer was Colin Clark, and I think that one of the things that I think is really critical is, to me, an amazing thing, and I'd really like Colin to talk a little about this, is, generally we think of lower housing prices as the price of decay. You could buy a house in North Philadelphia for $8,000 because nobody wants to live there. People want to live in Dallas. People make good livings in Dallas, and yet the prices haven't gone sky high. So, Colin, maybe you can explain what the miracle of Dallas is.
I can just sit here, I think, right? Right, yeah. So thanks so much, Joel. So I'm really honored to be here. I've had the opportunity at various times over the last few years to work closely with Joel and Wendell and Ryan Streeter and Stephen Pettigo. So as Ryan said, we've sort of gotten the band back together. It's a band I'm honored to be a part of. Let me say a little bit about what has actually happened in the major metropolitan areas of Texas, and I'll kind of focus on my own Dallas-Fort Worth, although it's not really statistically that different from the other big metropolitan areas of the state. We have a lot more in common than we do with most of the rest of the country, and certainly in huge contrast to where Jennifer and Joel come from. So here's a few basic kind of stats and a little bit of experience that I think we've had here in Texas. In the period since 2010, about 42% of all of the single-family homes and 36% of all of the apartments that have been built in the United States have been built in just 25 metropolitan areas. That are 25 of the 100 biggest metros, but all in the Sun Belt or to some degree stretching up into mountain states, places that represent only about 20% of the population. That's an amazing stat. Within these metropolitan areas, which include Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin, and Houston, and some other places further east, like Nashville and Charlotte and so forth, we see that about 80% of all the housing units that have been built have been not in core cities, but in typically very fast-growing suburban type places. So our ability to do as well as we have in America, and we haven't done well, we certainly haven't done well enough, but such as it is, it has been massively dependent on places like Collin County and Denton County north of Texas experiencing just enormous growth and making it actually possible. We have seen pretty big increases in the home price to income ratios that Wendell has tracked for many years in the Dallas-Fort Worth and in the Austin areas and so forth. I would put it to you that what that reflects is a huge growth in demand to live in these places. In fact, where demand was growing, and then it took a really big jump upwards kind of the last couple of years before COVID. I think changes in California, I'll leave it to the Californians to discuss that, to some degree explain that, because there was such a big surge from Jennifer's and Joel's state. But it was a gigantic increase in demand. We did probably a better job than most other places in the country possibly could have done at managing that growth and accommodating it through rapid housing growth, mostly in suburban areas. But there was not enough labor, not enough materials, not enough capacity in the world to actually keep up with that demand. So we saw an increase in prices, but less than in a number of other places, as Wendell has documented. When I think about what's happened in Dallas-Fort Worth, to zoom in a little bit, let me say something about both kind of the core cities of Dallas and Fort Worth, and also a little bit about these fast-growing suburban places. The collaborations I've done with Stephen in the back of the room there, we initially thought about calling these reports we've written the Texas Urban Blueprint, but we changed it to Texas Metropolitan Blueprint. And I think that's kind of an important point. If we're going to get our hands around the challenges here in kind of these big places in Texas like Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin, it really is a whole of the metro, effort. I think that the kind of the core city versus suburban sort of dichotomy that people make is a sterile, pointless debate. When I spent a lot of time, I think I spent about 7 or 8 hours talking to Connor Doherty ahead of that article in the New York Times, and I've done a lot of work on this. I myself published an article in City Journal just a few weeks ago that was also kind of about how to expand outwards intelligently. Got some nice feedback and some people who really get upset when you actually say that there should not be urban growth boundaries and so forth. So it's just interesting how people react. Let's say something about the core cities. I think that we need to be kind of realistic about what can be achieved even with the greatest reforms in core cities. I'm all for the reforms. Are you all well familiar? I know you all are Austinians mostly, but are you aware of the reforms to minimum lot size that have occurred in Houston? It started in 1998 in the central part of the city and spread to the whole city of Houston in 2013. And it's been exhaustively studied, and I think was probably a pretty big inspiration for the change that happened in Austin under Mayor Watson's leadership. So in Houston, they pretty much deregulated, or not totally deregulated, but took down the minimum lot size. So if a developer buys a parcel of land, into how small a lot can they subdivide it to build skinny townhomes and starter homes and so forth. And it's been heavily studied. And what we know is that there's something on the order of 40,000 plus units in Houston that exist today that would not otherwise exist, okay, if you do a fair analysis of what would have happened absent that reform, because of just that reform. We also know, and this is kind of both good news and bad news depending on your point of view, where did these units get built? Actually, only a very small fraction got built by developers buying a single family home on a large lot, demolishing it, chopping it up, and making it into smaller lots. A little bit of that happened, and it was legal to do. Most of what happened on relatively large parcels of raw land that someone could get their hand on a big enough lot to really do something economical, and they could subdivide it more finely, create more units, and that was a very good proposition. So in Dallas, we haven't done this yet, but I've estimated that if you take Houston's numbers, we could, I think, very easily, if we did the exact same reform, get 20 to 30,000 units out of that. Austin's a little smaller than Dallas, so probably 15 to 20,000 units would be my best guess over 10 or 15 years. That's pretty good. That's something like a 3 to 4% increase in population that becomes possible just from that one reform. Parking reform, a couple other things, I think can produce some real improvement. So I think it really is possible to get to something like a 4, 5, 6% increase in the population in built-up areas. Most of the rest of whatever growth is going to happen is going to happen on what is currently raw land. And that takes us into where have we really accommodated all this growth? Dallas, Fort Worth. We've actually done a pretty good job of turning what was kind of a dying downtown into a kind of live, work, play environment that is, it hasn't totally arrived, but it's coming along. More than 20,000 people now live in the old central business district of the city of Dallas. That was 0 in the year 2000, more or less. So that's pretty good. 20,000 is pretty good in a city of 1.3 million. But that's 20,000. Over the period since 2010, we've added something on the order of more than 2 million to the metropolitan area. Where have they gone? They've gone overwhelmingly onto what was previously raw land. 500,000 of them net went to Collin County, north of Dallas, into basically the southwestern quadrant of the county. 400,000 went to Denton County, just west of there, kind of the southeastern quadrant. 300,000 went into the city of Fort Worth, mostly into what was previously raw land, because Fort Worth has annexed a fair bit of land. So that's kind of what's worked. Joel was nice to bring up Connor Doherty when he was in town. One thing I told him he absolutely had to do, because I'd had the privilege of doing this, was going in a helicopter ride with Ross Perot Jr., because he's a pilot and one of Texas's biggest developers, cars and flying over the northernmost part of Fort Worth and over town after town after town that are growing explosively. Because he said you can't understand it till you see it from the sky. And I told Connor he should do the same thing, and Ross nicely took him. And what do you see? You just see hundreds of thousands of units that are not more than a few years old. And so it really is working, this whole model. But I do want to say something about urban growth boundaries, Texas style. I don't think it's likely in Texas we're going to do what they did in Portland, Oregon, thank God. That's not going to happen, right?
I hope you're right.
Yeah, but here's what we do in Texas that can actually create some headaches for the Texas miracle going forward, I think. If you go from one, fast-growing suburban municipality to another, what you get a lot of angst. You get a lot of people saying, well, in this town that, like, I was recently in Anna, Texas, in Collin County, a town that not long ago was 4,000 or 5,000 people, now is in the 20s, growing really fast. And the people there turn up to the town council meetings and they say, we like our rural feel. We don't want to turn into Frisco, the super fast-growing metropolitan city that's now 250, 260,000 people. And so what do? They legislate very large minimum lot sizes. They don't put up a boundary and say you can't build anything. They basically say we're going to have not a very big population, even given the physical extent of the place. Just 2 days ago, I spoke in Prosper, Texas, which, given in line with the name, is absolutely prospering. And in that place, they have enough land that if they just had the same density, I'm not some fan of super high density either, but if they just allowed what happened in McKinney, Texas, to happen in Prosper, Texas, they could be home to about 110,000 Texans. As it is, they're trying to cap it at about 70,000, okay? That's how we're going to do urban growth boundaries, Texas style, if we're not careful. So we do need to actually figure out how to actually, allow the housing that people want. I agree very much with what everyone said. What do people actually want? They want kind of the things everyone's talked about, but one last thing I'll say, then I'll stop on this. I think that we do know also from studies of the lot size issue in Texas in particular, that in town after town, scholars have kind of looked at this. If you have a minimum lot size, maybe it varies from this town to that town, what you see with new development is a big bunching up of developments that are just over the limit, and those units sell really, really well. What that tells you, and you see nothing right below the limit. What that tells you is the market seems to kind of want to, buy a starter home on a lot that is maybe a little smaller than that minimum lot size that Prosper, Texas allows. But on the whole, we don't allow it. So doing better on that is a significant part of how we're actually going to grow, the Dallas-Fort Worth area from 8.5 million today to 11.5 or 12 by 2050, and how the Austin area is going to do whatever it's supposed to do as well.
Thank you very much. Now that we know that Cullum is a media star, we have to treat him nicer. But the last speaker on this panel is Lance Gilliam, who's the managing partner of Concentric Community Advisors. He's also part of the LBJ School of Public Affairs, so very appropriate. But what I asked Lance to look at was the thing that we have not, I think, done, which is what do we do at the part of the market that's really underserved, which is the let's say the bottom 15, 20% of the population, and what kind of housing policies would help those people at least get into decent apartments and eventually towards home ownership. So, Lance? Yeah.
And thank you. And just a real quick, I'm a Houston guy, so thank you for the shout out for Houston. We get it right rarely, but sometimes. And there's some great work from my PhD advisor here. Jake Wegman did some great work on smaller lot sizes out of the School of Architecture. But to speak to a different set of numbers entirely, in our firm and the work we do at LBJ that's in my sphere, there are public-private partnerships in how to incentivize affordable housing. And affordable housing is a tough thing to define because you know it when you see it, but it also becomes conflated in, as simple as we call it, capital A affordable housing, which tends to be affordable housing that serves those lowest income families, the 50 and 30% of AMI, so very low and extremely low income, but also little a affordable housing, which tends to be workforce housing, and it's fascinating how the affordable housing industry does everything it can to avoid using the word affordable housing. So it can be workforce, essential, attainable, whatever it is, but it's not affordable housing solely for the purpose of avoiding what the mayor's talked about earlier, NIMBYs, because nobody wants poor people living in their neighborhood, right? We just want them working and contributing, but not actually living with us, and it's unfortunate how that conversation evolves. What we primarily talk about in terms of public policy is how do you turn $1 into 65 cents? You start in Washington and wait for it to get to a job site in Texas. And that happens, that literally happens, and we have the data that shows this. We can build the exact same multifamily housing unit using market labor, market materials on a market site for about $200,000 a door in Texas. And that's a 3 to 4 story garden style walk-up apartment that's highly amenitized, got a workout room, a great pool. You've seen it many times. A lot of our developers like Trammell Crow Residential build that product, and it's about $200,000 a door. The minute $1 in federal funds, whether it's low-income housing tax credits, it is funds from ARPA funds, it's CDBG funds, all the acronyms we use, the minute $1 in federal incentives touches that project, it goes to $300,000 a door. And in many cases, what's ironic is the quality of the environment that's built, the amenities are not comparable. So not only does arguably quality of the experience for the resident go down, but the cost increases dramatically. And it's complicated and it depends, but it's essentially a self-inflicted wound that arises from a myriad of rules, regulations, and requirements that I would simply put are not found in what might be referred to as the real world. And what's interesting about this particular administration, and I am not a fan and very concerned about many of its policies, how it will affect the cost to deliver housing in terms of labor and materials. But what is more likely than not to happen in our experience, and it's recent, and looking back in the past administration, is they will relax rules, regulations, and other requirements, and may allow us to deliver more homes. Now, it will be more multifamily homes, but it will be at the expense of other, for example, in this group, I'm not sure how this plays, but affirmatively furthering for housing, one of our great acronyms. It will be at the expense of other public policies. But in terms of getting units on the ground faster and more efficiently and at a lower cost, that is likely to be a byproduct of simply backing off of regulations. We're already seeing that, for example, with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They are lowering the cost of acquiring capital. Those savings can be passed through as a benefit to creating greater affordable housing opportunities. At the state level, I think everyone in this room may be aware, you guys may be from California, but is the state of Texas literally invests no money in affordable housing. We don't use any of our financial resources to support affordable housing. The few incentives we do have, and it came up in the last session, is Texans for Reasonable Solutions, for example, got a legislative package passed that hopefully, and I understand Mayor Watson's concerns that were expressed earlier, but should allow us to do a better job with single-family housing and taking some of the externalities away from delivering that. On the multifamily side, we're probably going backwards. In an effort to be fair, we're now taking one of the few incentives that we have right now, which are multifamily tax exemptions, and constraining those in ways that the market doesn't support. So we're going into a very perverse space in terms of public policy in Texas and incentivizing affordable housing, and particularly in the workforce space, and going into the laws of unintended consequences, as Mayor Watson said, is sometimes our legislator gets in the way of our own success. So that's on the multifamily side, and particularly affordable housing. It will be interesting, let's just put it this way, it will be interesting to watch to see what happens and how the impact of the federal policies and state policies play out over the next 12 to 24 months. I fear that although the federal policies will be helpful, the amount of federal funds will not be there, and the state policies are not going to be helpful in terms of delivery of the number of units that we need.
We've come maybe for a couple of questions, and we're running a little bit late, so. I think that this fellow here was first. And you can direct it to the whole panel or to any individual.
To the whole panel, what is the impact of distributed or remote work on housing supply? And based on your answer, are there any policy implications to promote remote work?
Well, you know, what we saw with remote work during the pandemic was a huge increase of people working at home. And you've seen all sorts of headlines about companies requiring their people to come back to work. But you need to read the articles to make sure you understand. Microsoft is requiring it 3 days a week. The point is that it is a great thing. You know, it has all sorts of advantages. People like it, but it's not for everyone. But we have seen this around the world. The same thing that happened here in the United States happened virtually around the world.
Can I say something about it too? Thanks. So there's a Stanford economist, Nicholas Bloom, who's tracked very closely what's actually been happening out there, as opposed to, you know, like Jamie Dimon's the most powerful banker in the world. He can say everyone has to come back to work, but it doesn't really happen. So what Bloom has shown is that we're at about the percentage of people who in a survey will say in the United States that they work pretty much entirely outside of a traditional office is like 15 or so percent now. It's a lot higher than it was before the pandemic. If he asks what percentage of all working hours, all compensated hours, are spent someplace other than a traditional workplace, it's in the high 20s. It's about 28 or so percent, trending very gently down. But you know, it went down a lot as we sort of came back from the pandemic, found a level, and then it's just neither Diamond nor anyone else is moving it all that much. So what does it actually mean for housing? I think it is plainly a force for deconcentration geographically. And one thing that I have written about that I think is kind of an interesting phenomenon is the kind of turnarounds in hundreds of places that in a report that I wrote, I kind of coined this term liminal cities, liminal meaning in between big metro areas and rural America, places that typically were kind of over the horizon from Dallas or Austin, and it used to be all the young people who were kind of ambitious, like left when they were young, and they thought of themselves as dying towns, but now actually they're sort of like distant exurbs that if people only commute 1 or 2 days a week, they actually just might choose to live there and pay, you know, half the price for the housing and have a nice small town charm and still be able to have, you know, you could say the work opportunities of living in the Austin or Dallas area.
All right, we have one more question. And just very briefly on remote work, as Colin suggested, when we do work where the fastest growing areas are, they tend to be exactly what we're talking about. People who would have lived maybe in the conventional suburbs of Seattle are now living 50 miles, 100 miles away. That's and we can categorize where the growth is taking place. So
I would just offer caution on deregulation to municipalities to pay attention if that really happens at a large scale, because what I've seen in Houston, as a former resident of Houston, flooding risk in the city has expanded dramatically because of site coverage in the suburban areas. For example, my friends live in Meyerland. They never were flooded before. They had 3 floods within 5 years recently because of coverage outside, not because of what happened inside the city. That's just one environmental factor. But there are many other factors. So I just, you know, you could also say that the crash of 2007, 2008, a lot of that happened because of lack of regulation to banking and other areas. So I would just caution anybody with a municipality to be careful if that happens, to kind of look at the repercussions.
Lance, you're a Houstonian, maybe you could address this.
Well, you're exactly right. It's funny, I was thinking about when we were talking about densification and the urban planning experience, from walking down the street in Houston right now, some of the townhouses that we built, you know, are not aesthetically pleasing, and there's better. I think a lot of y'all could learn from Houston. There's ways to densify correctly and other ways, and not all densified communities are built the same. We've probably overcorrected now on detention and how we're managing our floodplains. When we had Harvey, of course, hit Houston, which was devastating to us, we passed some regulations that do not allow for good engineering solutions. They're very, very rigid, but your concerns are very, very valid. So there's good densification and bad densification. It's not all created equally.
Just going back, I wanted to add one thing on the question about remote work. If you look at Portland, Seattle, and Denver, what you find is that there was heavy domestic migration to those locations until the pandemic. Since the pandemic, all of the migration to those states has been outside those areas. And one of the reasons that's going on is because housing affordability became so bad and because remote work was so popular.
Anyway, our partner in crime, Steve, it's time for that. And again, thank you, and I want to thank the panel very much because I thought it was very.
So our last panel is a panel that I'm really excited about, and it's a conversation with folks. If we just walk through some of the data points that Wendell and Cullum and Lance provided us, this next panel we're hoping to think about sort of what are the practical solutions that practitioners in the space are really advocating for and advancing as it relates to the work to create more options for market-driven solutions for housing. I'm going to just jump really quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time kind of framing the panel because I do want to have an opportunity to talk about and jump into discussion. But we've got three great panelists with us tonight. First is Diana Bangle, who is the CEO of the Real Estate Council of Austin, a really important group here in Austin. Sometimes I like to say they are the ones that bring practicality to the discussions as it relates to housing here in Austin. It is a real estate organization that engages both civic leaders, but a lot of the folks that are doing development in Central Texas, and particularly on the construction side, design side, as well as folks that are advocating for the space. And just super important for our region. The next panelist is Lalu Davies. Lalu's a dear friend of mine. He's from the Texas Lyceum. He is a principal at Five Woods Realty in Houston. Their sweet space is really focusing on housing, workforce housing, and infill housing for working and middle-class families. I encourage you to check out all of our speakers on LinkedIn and their electronic profiles, but Lalu has been engaged in Houston policy and housing for such a long time. Pretty storied career in doing work in the space. I know he's also on the Houston Community Board of Trustees, I believe, as well. Thank you for correcting me. I would have gotten that incorrect on the exam. And then finally, our last our speaker is David French. David, first time for me to meet you. Dan, pardon me. And Dan leads a private equity real estate firm here in Austin. He's an entrepreneur kind of looking at this idea of AI and prop tech and technology, really centered on sort of thinking about how we advance technology, real estate to create more housing options here for residents. So with that, what I'd love to do is give an opportunity of each of our speakers to talk a little bit about, from their point of view, what's working for each of you and your point of views in the communities that you represent and the work that you're doing both across the state here and across the country to help us kind of untap the value. How are you thinking about that work? And Diane, we'll start with you.
Sure. And I would say that my focus is fixing land use policies to unlock housing. And to give you a little background, my organization is about 2,000 members. They are developers, brokers, bankers, builders, contractors, engineers, architects, everybody involved in commercial real estate. And think about them building everything larger than a single family home. So you're talking about mixed use development, you're talking about multifamily, you're talking about the tallest office and residential tower in the town, and everything in between. And so I'm tasked with my team to advocate on their behalf. And we do that by partnering very well with our city. And when they are implementing policy, we are called in as real stakeholders. We are real people in the room that actually tell them what are the impacts of you making this policy. And it's while the policy is being made. And so we're bringing real examples. We're saying this is what's going to happen. And we've had success with that. I know the mayor and a lot of people up here have talked about the minimum lot size. We advocated for that. We advocated for more units on a single family lot. You know, we advocated for a new transit overlay for the new future rail line to have very thoughtful development and affordable and market rate housing along that line to incentivize that. We advocate for getting the building permit process going faster. So we do all of that, and all of it together is what helps unlock housing.
Joel is next, and Joel, I apologize for missing your introduction, but Joel Farkas is joining us from Denver, Colorado, my friends. Has spent many years kind of in this vertically integrated real estate energy space, and is going to talk to us a little bit about his perspective, thinking about kind of planned communities as well. So Joel, great to have you.
Thank you. I have the distinction of not only living in California in the past, which is a one-party state, but also now Colorado. It's also a one-party state. And probably two of the most difficult communities in the United States to build what everyone here is talking about. Let me just describe from a humanistic standpoint what NIMBY means. I've been to more than 2,000 or so public hearings, whether they're fire district, municipal districts, city council, county commissioner, homeowner association meetings. I've never heard the following ever spoken in any meeting I've been to, which is, I want someone who makes less than me, whose house costs less than mine, living next to me. So that's the reason why this problem is so difficult to solve. Mm-hmm. It has one common denominator, which is many people have a different opinion, and most of it is kind of a pejorative opinion. So having said that, that doesn't mean it's the cause is lost. There's a lot of things that many of the speakers earlier said that are critically important, and we have limited time, so I'm going to make it very short. The infrastructure, meaning water and sewer, particularly in the western United States, is the single largest impediment to building every good idea that everyone in this room has. And the solution is for developers, and I am a developer who builds master plan communities, both retail shopping centers and single-family detached housing, with an emphasis on home ownership. The solution is to come at it with, how are we going to, we meaning us as a developer, knowing who our buyers are, what they can afford, and knowing who the approving jurisdiction is and what they can and cannot do. How are we going to build that infrastructure so that's reasonable and cost effective? Because as much as the land, as much as the interest payments on the mortgage with interest rates, as much as anything else, are the fees and the permits that you have to pay and the cost to build infrastructure. And we have found in our developments when we address that, because what is the first thing you want to do? You want to finance it so it's reasonable and it's not astronomical. And you also want to be able to build, when the mayor of Fort Worth mentioned somebody to a question, which was property taxes. Well, there's a lot of expense the municipality goes through when you have an entry-level, first-time home buyer. That's the business of city government. That's another issue. Those are the kinds of things in order to solve the problem, to provide a first-time home buyer the ability to buy a home in a municipal jurisdiction that you start with. When you combine all those things together, then you get out of the silo of whatever it is each one of us do or does, and you put it all together, and you start the project that way. And we've found in many cases that has succeeded in two abysmal states to work in, California and Colorado.
You're not biased or anything.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, Dan French. I'm happy to see some young folks in the audience. I do wonder if you're here under your own power or if your professors made you come, but you're under their own power. Okay, we'll take your word for it. I was having PTSD because in my 20s, I was an elected official for 7 years in my hometown, and I was a councilman for 5 and a town supervisor for 2. It's like being a mayor. So you couldn't call it, you can call it anything but affordable housing. That really resonated with me when the gentleman up here said that, because it's very tough. I remember the biggest town board or town hall meeting we ever had was when we were passing inclusionary zoning, which is, allows for affordable or attainable housing, which is what we had to call it. People just came out in droves, right? Because it was a suburban, very high growth area in the New York City metro, and people just did not want this concept of inclusionary zoning. So thank you to the elected officials that are doing that hard work. It's tough. You get yelled at and screamed at. It's wild. But the last 15 years, I've been more on the investment side. So I was CEO of a real estate firm that had $2 billion of assets under management, 17,000 apartment homes. So I really deeply understand the investment space. But right now, I just took on a new role as COO of a single-family rental property management company. It's called North Point.
Okay.
And yeah, it's got a national footprint, about 6,000 doors. And what's on my mind recently has been there's a zeitgeist within the media right now to really pile on to these like so-called bad guys of institutional home ownership, which is I want to debunk that really quickly. 0.5% of the housing stock in the U.S. of single-family detached homes is actually owned by institutional, capital owners, and that's about 2 to 4% of the overall SFR rental. So SFR, so single-family rental, right? So 2 to 4%. It's very small, and even the UC Berkeley, which in many ways is kind of the opposite of what Civitas maybe is going for. UC Berkeley itself had a study, one of the people there had a study, neighborhoods with institutional SFR buyers saw rents fall, and then it became more racially and economically diverse in those neighborhoods. And really what I'm very passionate about and very missionary focused on is for allowing people to have great outcomes with their lives. And part of that is by providing great housing opportunities for people that can't afford a down payment in a home. They should be able to rent in a great neighborhood. I have 4 kids. Right? So luckily I'm in a great neighborhood with a wonderful school district, right? It's right here in Austin. It's outside of the mayor's purview of the city of Austin, but it is a wonderful place and I'm blessed. But many other people want to have their kids to be able to have this great outcome, and that is largely driven by what school district you're in. So if you have wonderful professionalized property management, that's a great housing outcome because many people can't afford that 20%, but they can afford a 1-month rental security deposit. So we should be able to have many options within the housing stock.
Great. Lalu.
All right. Dan, if you could scoot over about 4 inches. When I moved over to this seat, I didn't realize how close I am to the edge. All right. Now I can relax and talk a little bit. All right. Thank you so much. All right. The mayor was talking about how much public safety and EMS costs. I don't see any around here, so we didn't need me to be the experiment. So, good evening. I'm in Houston, right? So it's great to hear Joel talk about developing in some of the most difficult to build places. I'll talk about Houston here in a second because I think it's relevant when we sort of think about whether it's a one-party state. We are a one-party state, and despite being in Houston where we have no zoning, we don't have some of the same challenges that you might deal with, building is still very difficult. Newsflash, like notwithstanding everything else. But before I get into that, I want the central coalescing theme when I think about housing that I try to share in front of audiences is we need to start thinking about housing as essential infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Just like we think about roads, water, sewer, the whole bit, housing is essential human infrastructure. And so if we start to think about housing in that context, you have to understand that just like infrastructure, housing ages. And so a lot of the housing stock that we have is aged over time. So when you're really thinking about that, and when we try to talk about the lack of housing, it's hard to perceive because people see housing everywhere. So what do you mean that there's no housing? Next, I'll say we need to think about housing as a continuum. We're here on a college campus. Students have student housing, right? That's part of the continuum. So from that to the extended stay hotel, the short-term rentals, SFR rentals that Dan does, the master plan communities that Joel builds, multifamily apartments. It's all an entire continuum. And I'm not here to defend the investment-owned real estate market, but that continuum is part of the housing stock that we do have. And so when we're thinking about housing, you have to think about the totality of housing. Finally, we have to, through all of this, figure out how do we deliver more housing, whether you want to do it in the ADU context, fourplexes, duplexes, you name it. At the end of the day, that human infrastructure is essential. It's part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People need shelter. And if you think about it that way, everything that we're hopefully here talking about keeps us focused on the fact that some housing supply has to be delivered. So despite the fact that I operate and build in Houston, we have a lot of the same challenges. Notwithstanding not having zoning, we have a lot of form-based codes that we have to deal with. Parking requirements, detention, I think Lance mentioned that. We overcorrected in response to flooding. Jeff Ballotine is a great friend. What you shared is quite factual. A lot of the rice fields that got built out in West Harris County exacerbates the flooding that occurs within Houston. But it's also important to note, there was a study that was done that I think of the homes that flooded during Hurricane Harvey, which was our big storm in 2017, I mean, less than 3% of them were built after 2003, so which demonstrated that most of the issues had been corrected, but it was those homes that were built before they were really in vulnerable areas. But with that, Stephen, I know you've got some questions, and in interest of time, I'll pause.
That's great. Thank you all for those comments. Diana, I want to just come back to you a little bit and talk a little bit about the work that Rika's done here in Austin. What are those kind of policy changes that you hope that when we look out sort of 10, 15 years from now here in Central Texas as we're growing, that we'd point back and say these are some successes that Rika had in the policy space to change the market? And then maybe how do we think about those being applied to other places across Texas, across the country as well?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, and I would say that I would look forward to our policy work coming to fruition and where we see old vacant shopping centers redeveloped into housing, where we would see the missing middle product type, the duplexes, the small apartments, all of the townhomes, everything that we should be building, making it so it's legal and not illegal. The transit, future rail line, the idea that we can build responsibly and more housing, I'd like to see that in the future based on our work. We've got within half a mile of the future rail line, you can build by right up to 90 feet. Within a quarter mile, you can build by right up to 120 feet. And there's some affordability requirements, which there should be, but those are calibrated. And according to our members, that's going to work very well. So I'd like to see some of those. We also advocate at the state level, and I will tell you that one of the bills that our members have been very excited about and have been asking many questions about as the city of Austin tries to understand its impacts is Senate Bill 840. And that allows by right residential housing to be built in commercial zones. So think commercial zones, retail, there now does not need to be a rezoning process. So before this bill, developers would have a piece of land in a commercial zone. They're not going to go through the time, the money, the expense to go through a rezoning. If you now have taken away that barrier, which they have, you're going to build housing and you're going to be thoughtful about it. You're probably going to do small apartments. You're going to do some townhomes, duplexes. You're going to figure it out. So that is a brand new unlock. That is not just for Austin. That is for some of the major Texas cities. All the cities are trying to figure out the impacts of that, because what it forces them to do is look back in their codes and find out where the conflicting regulations are and the code ordinances that they have to, remedy to make sure this is working. But the by right, being able to build housing is a huge advantage for unlocking housing.
Joel, you had mentioned in your remarks that a lot of times when we're thinking about new housing, a lot of it is, particularly affordable housing, and thinking about this continuing, that it's just that residents maybe don't want that type of housing in their communities, or sort of thinking through putting up barriers. And a lot of times we see this under the realm of kind of thinking about it as preservation of community, preservation of neighborhoods. I'm curious to know, maybe as you guys have done development out in Colorado, as you're doing your master planning work, how are you engaging with residents? Are there tactics that really work on that community engagement piece? Because it does seem to me that a lot of times we're fighting the battle of public perception a lot of times as we're doing the work in communities.
Yeah, I mean, what are our tactics?
Yeah, like how are you overcoming those challenges?
We talk to people. What I found is it's not really, we develop in California, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, various places, and I found that there is really a schism between urban areas, suburban and exurban areas.
Yep.
It's not between the states. It is, that's the schism. So what I found also is that the urban areas are ideologically impractical, the kind word. The people that we've seen the data. I mean, the people, the Civitas Institute and Chapman University, Joel and Wendell and everybody, the data is irrefutable as to where people want to live. And what are we talking about? I can't tell you how many times I've said to an elected official in front of a public hearing, a grandparent and their kids and their grandkids living next to each other. It sounds like a wonderful idea, but every single thing that you're doing precludes that from happening. That cannot happen in an urban area. It can happen in a suburban, rural, or exurban area. And that's the conversation that we go to. And then the next subject is, which is ubiquitous around the country, they don't have enough money or capacity to serve it. Mm-hmm. Well, the answer is, we're going to work with you and we're going to do that. Mm-hmm. That's the engagement.
Mm-hmm. Lulu, how are you guys doing this in Houston? I know that a lot of the things that you're doing requires community engagement. How are you approaching that? Maybe is there some similarities in some of the things that Joel suggested here?
So in Houston, when you're building affordable housing, because we don't have zoning, that's not a requirement. But when you're using low-income housing tax credits, or you're engaged with the city or the county, that's when it becomes a necessity. And it's just similar to you have to set up the environment, and you invite people into a room like this, and then you give them a chance to throw darts at you, and you try your best to provide cogent responses to people who might not really be listening. So we're doing better, because part of what's also emerged in the last few years is sort of the YIMBY movement. Yes, in my backyard. And so you're seeing some of that happening a little bit more. The real fights around public engagement happened, a few years back. We've got a little better because now more people understand, when you looked at the charts that Wendell Cox had up earlier, Houston is one of those cities now that we used to be the bastion of affordability, and it's no longer the case. So more people are interested in housing affordability. There's more of an ear to it. Even from a policymaker perspective, I remember years ago, Fort Bend County Commissioner who had sworn over affordable housing, we're not going to do it here. One year I go sit with him, he's like, well, you know what, my granddaughter came home from college, and we try to find her place, and we can't find a place that she can afford. She's a teacher. And so all of a sudden, affordable housing mattered to him. Similarly, a council member in Kingwood, after flooding occurred from Harvey, it was like, oh, when you talk about this. So I think it's really that persistent engagement, and that's been part of the work that I've done with the Houston Housing Collaborative, which we started in 2016, to really heighten the sensibilities of the larger community about the challenges with housing affordability.
Mm-hmm. So Dan, I know in your new role, you're kind of thinking through this idea in the prep call, we talked a lot of this idea about how do we control costs, particularly project management costs. And there was lots of conversations, which was about the use of AI technology and the role of innovation in this space. Curious to hear a little bit about your perspective about, as you are thinking about property management, lowering costs as it relates to this. What's the biggest barrier to adoption as we start to think through taking those technologies and trying to get owners and operators to embrace this technology as a way to maybe help control costs as we get properties developed?
Yeah, I'm very inspired by Bezos at Amazon. I've read all the shareholder letters, and they're the best. I mean, so I'm inspired by things outside of the real estate industry. That's very important. If you look at CSAT scores, it's customer satisfaction scores, Amazon's always tops. And they ship millions and millions of packages, maybe by, I don't even know, by the hour now at this point. There's this massive, amazing, great experience for customers because they're customer focused, but more importantly, they're long-term oriented. Mm-hmm. And real estate private equity, which is my background, it tends to be a 3 to 5 year hold. So they're not as enthusiastic about, deploying capital into the operations side. Many of those folks think about it as a buy side and a sell side transaction only, and in between, especially in a interest rate environment, and which is what we've experienced of almost near zero between after the GFC and until about 2.5 years ago. It was very easy to just say, well, we just make money on the buy side, and then when you sell right, it's all good. No, that is not the case anymore, right? You have to have great ops. And that's why I'm so passionate to join a property management only firm. And I want to deploy great things like we're having, like you experience in Uber Eats or DoorDash. No one wants to really talk to a human anymore, right? Gen Z, am I right here or no?
I don't even want to take an Uber that's not a Waymo anymore.
I don't want to talk, seriously, I don't want to talk to a human unless I absolutely have to. I just want things to work.
Yeah.
And that's what the real estate private equity mindset is, so short-term oriented. We have to start thinking long-term about operations, and AI is a long-term play. You cannot fix a very complex ops with just throw AI at it. That's not how it works. Because we're swimming in tech. Let me tell you, we have probably, in my last company, we had 100 different distinct softwares that we were using. 100. And sometimes the fog of war in operations doesn't allow you to actually make all that work better. The tech bloat makes you actually slow down.
Yeah.
So you have to be very thoughtful about how to use AI and machine learning and different capabilities.
Anyone else want to tackle this question, the use of AI technology innovation in the space?
Well, I want to talk about affordability, but if
go ahead.
Not so much AI, because I think our industry, Joel will agree with this, real estate is slow to react to change, right? It's just a legacy business. We don't move that fast. 3D printed housing, yeah, it's coming, and we're all waiting. Right. So, but as far as affordability, what we're doing on the developer side, Joel, I will say, some people still want to build in urban areas. Houston is open for business, and so
LaLue is open for business, my friends.
We're an infill developer, and we build within the city limits. But what we've had to do is really think about everything from start to finish, from the site planning, how you position the site, how we drain it. The amount of money we spend on, I've got a current project. It's a giant detention pond that's just land that we can't claim back, but it's what's necessary. So we've had to be very efficient with the design, how we extend the utility lines, because that becomes critical, and then how we design the livable space. We try to design it with people in mind, making sure that every square foot in there is accounted for. I'll give you, for example, I know I don't want to get on social media that LaLue said UT does not build good buildings, but when I look at an open space like this, we don't have vaulted ceilings because we can't afford to have it because it's non-usable real estate space. You see that mezzanine level? That's kind of how we have to think about it. Like, this is great and cute, but we need functionality. And so that's a big part of it, and it comes down to material selection, and we really have to think about everything at the onset. What's the finished product that you want? And unlike most firms who are a smaller builder, that's one point I was going to make. When you look at infill building, those are mostly smaller builders. Small builders don't get to go build master plan communities. So there's that issue with scale, that we can't match the big builders in terms of purchasing power and running through some of the regulatory gauntlet that you have to. So we have to be very crafty in what we do. So I'll pause there.
So we actually are very short on time, but we got time for one more question, and let's just ask the same question for all of you. We'll go down the line perhaps. So a lot of folks in the room are practitioners or many students that will want to be practitioners in this space. What's one practical takeaway that you'd want our audience to know about, how do we advance the idea of affordability and growth, and do it in utilizing the market to help us?
Yeah, I mean, I'm encouraged by all the young people wanting to hear this conversation. I would say, just really practical, join hands with everyone, work with everyone. I think some of the biggest wins I've ever had in the last eight and a half years at RECA was when we had unlikely bedfellows and allies that we put together a coalition to build more housing, and we got together. You've got business community with housing advocates, with developers, with environmental groups. I mean, everybody under the sun, and you're not always going to agree, and that's the best part about it. You're going to work through things. You're going to have a better policy for it, and let me tell you what the policymakers love. They like it when a big coalition comes together and they're going to pass a policy that's been vetted that way. So I just encourage everyone, speak to everyone, and join together.
So civic engagement and association engagement, really, really important.
And join the LBJ Library Future Forum.
There you go.
Really simply, when you go to a jurisdiction, start with asking them what they need, not what you want.
That's a great question.
And there's 19,300 municipal jurisdictions in this country. A lot of them aren't going to like what you have to say. Find the ones that do.
So find a really good partner. That's a great advice.
I've never been a developer, but I would encourage developers to focus on beauty. Like if you've ever been to a church that's built in the 70s, you just don't feel that great there. It tends to be not that nice. But if you go to a beautiful church, you're like, wow, my faith experience today has been really transformative, because you feel like called to something higher, right? I think that's affordable housing's main issue, is that we kind of stick these these kind of ugly buildings in a neighborhood that doesn't want them. It's just going to stick out. So I think if we build for beauty and more enduring, something that's going to look better. And also, by the way, people will take better care of their homes if they live in a better place, right? And so I think that's very important.
Great. Lalu, you get the last word, my friend.
Yeah, I can't believe Dan just insulted all you architects out there, because the last I checked, developers build to the plan. I think for those who believe they want to be in the theoretical side, which is your planners, and that's not casting aspersions, but if you want to be someone who helps envision, get with a practitioner. Get with a practitioner early in your career so that you're tethered to a grounded understanding of what it really takes to deliver what you envision. That's my advice to the young people.
Okay, great. My friends, join me in thanking the panel. Ryan's going to close us out.
Well, thanks to all of our speakers today, and thanks to all of you for coming. I know that this closing set of comments is referred to as a call to action. I think you've actually heard quite a few calls to action today, and I don't think I need to add on to that. What I want to just highlight and also just express my appreciation for is the way in which our speakers today focused especially on this connection between housing provision, type of housing, and just fundamental American aspiration. I think for those of us who've gone to a lot of housing policy conferences over the year, a lot of them are very ideologically charged, or they're motivated by the interests of the people in the room. And I think what really showed today is that this fundamental aspiration for upward mobility is a core aspect of who we are. And despite presidential candidates of both parties over the last few years telling us that the American dream is dead, the best survey data shows that middle income and working class Americans actually still believe, of every demographic in that income category, that the American dream is alive, and that they want to believe that they live in a country where it's possible to make your way up the ladder, however you define it. Being able to afford a place to live is a key part of that. And I will just add as a side note, the people who think that the American dream is dead are highly educated people on both sides of the political spectrum. So it's the people actually with higher incomes and higher levels of education that believe the American dream is dead. But for most Americans, that's not the case. One thing that I think is really interesting that just has not gotten the amount of coverage given its importance, I think, over the last 40 years. And literally 40 years ago, right now in 1985, this data point really stands out to me. If you look at the 15 most unequal metropolitan areas in the country, 15 most unequal defined by the gap between the top 10% of earners' household income and the bottom 10% around the country, you find that they're overwhelmingly mid-sized cities, and the majority of them are in the South. I think the largest city on the list is New Orleans. This was just 1985. This is 40 years ago. So that's 20 years after the Civil Rights Act. I mean, you're really looking at a metropolitan and urban inequality that's very much driven by the legacy of racial segregation and discrimination. You fast forward to today, and almost none of those cities are on the list. The 15 most unequal metro areas are the ones that you would probably think of. New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Washington. None of those places were on that list just 40 years ago. So we've actually lived through a period of time when these are all places where they're high-powered economies. They're places people want to be to realize dreams for themselves and their kids, and they can't get into them. And so I really think that over the last 20 years, as we've watched this kind of gathering consensus about the drivers of the unaffordability of housing, it's been tracking in parallel with this development, which has happened in most of our lifetimes, where there's this real felt sense that access to places that should be providing lots of opportunity for lots of different kinds of people is becoming harder and harder. And so to the extent that we have kind of a newfound agreement on a lot of these things, we're encouraged by that. And if I just take you back to the mayor's comments, there's still a lot of work for us to be doing, municipality by municipality, to try to be that kind of place that's an exception to that trend that I was just talking about. And I really do think we've put together a group of people in the room today who care about that, who are very thoughtful about that. And I just ask y'all to to join me in thanking all of them one more time. Thanks for being here. Drive safely home or wherever you're headed tonight. And do sign up for future events at the LBJ School and at the Civitas Institute, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.